I decided to go for a rather broader perspective about wireless networking. We are now in a lot of discussions how it should look like for the future. So I'll try to give you some of my considerations, and essentially starting with some general perspective, then bringing up the hypothesis that we can learn a lot for general type networking, including wireless networking, just following what we do in sensor networks in recent years, not only us, but the community. And well, then I would like to introduce our sensor network testbed, allowing us the practical work, as there is a lot of testbed activities with the famous orbit here. And then I would like to go into some challenges beyond the pure technology of networking, which are connected with the space of experiment. So I'll try to use the time in the best way. Okay, let's start with the beginning. You see, we have a lot of communication development. Now, are you happy with the communication as it is today? And I collected a couple of questions which are kind of typical for what people suffer at these days, starting with just bring your new wireless gadget to home and try to connect it to whatever you have already. That might be a pain. Just try to find out, say just for the case of argument, what Mrs. Clinton said on health system in '96, and then you have to go through like 400 hours of archival videos and 2,000 of documents. And no, I'm not agitating for Obama, but I might be interested, yeah? Take any other topic, the same story. Now, if I would like to pass to you a file, I'll probably use an USB stick rather than any networking. That must have some reasons, you see? But that's natural, and whatever. Well, if you go to some web page, you ask yourself, do I empty my battery or my bank account when I start downloading that? I don't know at the moment. So there are a couple of typical issues how to deal with that. How are we going to distribute an announcement to people within this building, within the block? I don't have technology for that. Not really. I can start shouting. Yeah, but that's not the solution. Okay, so having said that, I'd like to come back to very roots. And the roots are for me, well, why do humans use communications? And I believe there are three reasons for that. Well, it's exchanging of information, and we use runners, that's the source of the marathon. That was a Greek runner to bring the message. We flags, mirrors, and yes, nowadays email and www. But also we use communication to maintain interhuman relations, and that is very important. There are the letters of affection, there are all the emails and phone calls. Honey, I'll be later today. Yeah, you don't see your honey, but you are calling her, honey, I didn't forget you. I'm still working, you see, and whatever. And then that's entertainment. And it was historically passive. People went to theater, live theater. And yes, they did it together, so that was both maintaining interhuman relations and entertainment. And then there's videos and games and whatever. And essentially those have been much better developed. I'll argue about that. But in any case, what we did when we started pushing technology, we developed separate technological support separately for each of those. Completely separate solutions. Now, if you take some features of the classical communication, and remember, communication was a part of engineering, electrical engineering, has nothing to do with any mathematics or later free computer science. Yeah? That's communications. So it was focused completely on information transport. And over ages, there have been no ways of information storage and information processing beyond the humans receiving the information and using filing cabinets or whatever, or books or whatever to keep the information. So the classical, if you like, continuation of the dream of perfect communication is Imagine that your corresponding partner is not remote, but close. Imagine what you would like to use as means of communication with him, having him face to face. And now try to do the same remotely. So what we are missing? The touch, the smell, the taste, yeah? I cannot kiss my honey remotely, still, but that's one way of thinking. Now, the story means that processing was for an electrical engineer coding and later switching. That's it. No other functionalities. Now, today, therefore, because of this mindset, we have end-to-end transport of media. We have all the content, the information is melted in media. We have voice, we have video, we have data, and we essentially as humans, we use source and presentation devices, phones, TV sets, to help in transmitting media. We are wrongly coding that content. That might be true for entertainment, for media, for art. If you have a painting, then the medium and the content are melted, but only in that case. In other cases, I can very well, and I'll argue for that, separate the information from the media. I can speak the same information, I can write it down, I can make a painting, a cartoon, and give the same information with completely different media. But we melted that. And yes, we pushed to humans the whole burden of selecting the type of media, of selecting the proper devices, of dealing with the devices in a proper way, everything we have to do. So, when we started speaking about multimedia communication, we started just melting the transport of different media on a single selected technology. And we made a lot of mistakes. So if you take the WLAN story of success, what was the push? The push was more bits per second, speed. That have been the generation of the standard. Now, let's take, in the sense of multimedia transmission, voice over IP over WLAN, and yes, if you take the full from fixed lines taken codec, worst case 64 kilobits per second, you might take half of that, you might take 1/10 of that, but let's take the full. If you have 11 megabits per second with the most popular 802.11b, you should have like 180 voice streams. In the reality, you have 6 in good quality, 11 in worse quality. I'm speaking about basic functionality of WLAN as it is. No tricks and enhancement at the moment. Meaning that was completely not prepared to do that, and we cannot do that in a pretty much efficient way. Now, one can do very much better if you start looking at the coding and vulnerabilities of the individual packets on losses, for example. So one of my students, Christian Hene, has done that, written a couple of papers, could improve that significantly by just annotating at the codec which packets in the single voice stream, in the single calls, are more important, less important, the so-called voiced and unvoiced packets, information, and then you can do a much better if you start thinking what are you really transmitting. But what we really need is a content. So essentially, the phenomenon of internet, the phenomenal success of internet, was bringing storage of information and search for stored information in addition to communication. That was completely different angle, view. And now, if you do that, we can state that it's not access to communication facilities which we usually need. We need access to information. Not, I put aside the entertainment, I put aside just the keeping in touch with your honey, I'm speaking about the most important issue, which gives the drive for the internet, that was information. And we can do much better if we stop thinking about communication as pushing bits, but start thinking about pushing information. And just an example I would like to give you is, I have a problem. I would like to look after a baby, and I would like to work outdoors, in the lab, wherever. So what can I do? The classical solution would be put a camera, put a mic in the baby's room. That's what I would do, looking after the baby face to face. I would look and I would listen. So I can do that, I can transmit that, and you can compute as homework how many megabits per second do I need to transmit the high quality, high resolution video and nicely voice, and I have to split my attention. I will do something in the lab and look at the screen, and do it there and look at the screen. Now the modern solution, the future solution would be put a lot of cameras and a lot of sensors around the baby, process the data locally, and send me a couple of bits classifying baby is sleeping. And even better, send me a couple of bits when the state of the baby changes. As long as it's still sleeping, I just need only a blink that the system is operable, because it could go out of order, but essentially I would like to be alerted when the baby is waking up. So that is what I need as information, and that's few bits occasionally, that's not wasting of bandwidth, and that's what I need really, and that makes the difference. So I believe that information will be derived from the media, and essentially I would like to have a world when automatically my context in which I am will be recognized, and then according to what needs I have, what I'm interested in, essentially what terminal do I have available? Is that only a cellular phone? Is that a laptop? Is that a huge screen in this room? Would I like to share the screen with you and get my honey, I'm doing well, on the screen now? But then, taking that into the consideration, I can put the content, or even more, I can put information services. And that's the melting, essentially, of information and computer science with what we used to have as communication, as pumping bits across the lines, or analog signals, by the way. So, essentially, the focus goes on providing context-dependent information and triggering context-dependent actions. Now, the question is that really a new perspective? Because some people announce that, I mean, I'm not the discoverer of this idea, by no means, but that's the trend. So a lot of people start talking about that. Now, really, we had this situation in quite a different area, and it was called automation, and I'm very proud to have my master degree, my graduation degree in automation. You see, and that gives me a little bit different perspective. So we always, in automation, have been essentially interested in capturing information, the source information, the measurements, as essential issue. And then we had control algorithms which should follow some goal. You don't collect information just out of the blue. You collect them with some goal, and the goal changes depending on the situation of the controlled plant. You might use several inputs. You used stored past values and experiences. You use predictions. You use complex classification algorithms for the situation of the plant. And then the results, and that's very important, have to be delivered in what we used to call real time, in the time scale commensurable with operation of the plant. If I'm controlling remotely a plane, it doesn't help me to have 2 weeks of computations because I crashed, after 5 seconds. It doesn't help me at all to have all the algorithms which are not timely. So Obviously, also, we have recognized for a long time that the long-term reliable control is not possible without what we call feedback. We look what is the result of our doing, and we do corrections in intelligent way. And obviously, the local goals of local control loops might be in contradiction, and the question is how can we achieve a global goal by decomposing it into local goals which are manageable. So that's all well known. That's like at latest 60s, late 50s, 60s, early 70s, where that has been really studied and understood in depth. Now, if we look at this perspective of the loop, taking data, processing data, implementing the results, we compare that with today's information system, and essentially we don't measure anything. We have our world of information, the beautiful WWW, is essentially consists of information which we humans have put there as web presence. You are not distributing your information, you are not there. In the science, in the research, you don't put your URL properly, you are not existent. Or you have to be a Nobel Prize already award. Yeah, then you are existent, you don't need it. Now we have lousy support for recognizing that information is there, that are crawlers. That's not really good, well done. And we have probably, hopefully, improving support for selection, which is Google the name today, and that's it. So that's distribution, that's not capturing the information, that's just trying to distribute what we have there. What do we miss? We miss automatic collection, extraction of information, as well as automatic generation of the context to select the information in a proper way. And yes, we miss acting back into the reality. And well, this has a lot of names and a lot of issues, and in addition to that, we have to stop looking at wireless as unavoidable, lousy replacement of wires, but that is the dominating medium now. Yeah, forget the backbone where you always will have the whole optical trunks, that's fine, but essentially that is the basic medium with its own features and gives a lot of ideas how to work differently if you don't try to change the wireless channel into replacement of a wire. And that's bad. Now, this coupling, that has a lot of names. People refer to that with cyber physical systems, things, Internet of Things, and well, in Europe we call that frequently cooperating objects, whatever, but that's the essence of the story where we are and what we are dealing with. Now, what I'm claiming, that having seen the perspective of the automation, it's more than natural to start thinking whether we can learn from a very recently, last 10 years, booming discipline, the wireless sensor networks research. Well, what I believe are the unique features of the wireless sensor network research, its focus of information that was always there, and that has been from the very beginning, and very integrated treatment of information generation, transmission, and processing, including in-network processing. Why have we done that in the sensor network community? Because we had these very tiny pieces of hardware. We had very strong limitations on power, and we wanted to have longevity of operation. And well, it was the only option to squeeze your functionality in this couple of kilobytes memory which you had, and burning these picojoules of energy. You had to look holistically on the story and not separate. Yes, another principle, we have cheap, non-reliable, redundant nodes, and by the way, also roots. The nodes operate discontinuously because of the cycling and saving energy. The signal is weak, so the connectivity is also coming and vanishing. The signal quality is changing. We have to have cooperative operation for achieving the goals. And we have the paradigm that we keep operation of the system in spite of the failure of individual components. The objects are redundant, they can replace each other, so essentially the role is important, not the identity. To some extent it's like, well-organized manufacturing operation where you say, I need 5 men to unload this truck. I don't care whether John or Paul will pop up. I need 5 people to operate the machinery, and that's it. You see, now we have deeply embedded systems. We have really the possibility of shrinking the devices. And when my Berkeley colleague Chris Pister has come up with the idea of smart dust, people have been kind of enjoyed or annoyed, it depends. Now we have really the potential of putting sensors in very strange places. We can put them into jewelry. We can put them, I have done that personally, inside electrical motors and got the signal wirelessly out of the big electrical motor. We can put them under or in your skin or in your brains. Jutta and my colleague Reichel from Fraunhofer and our department has done that. So you have a possibility to get the data, but you'll have very fine-grained information quanta, very dedicated information. And it's too fine-grained usually to create an individual action, but it's also much too valuable to be used only for one purpose. If you implant something in my brains, I wouldn't like to have hundreds of them, each one for one dedicated function, if I can avoid that. So that we are. Combining of information for useful usage was always the driver, no doubt about that. Now the other source of information will be the terminals of choice for the future, the smartphones. That's a long time ago we did have these dumb, simple telephones. Essentially, they have big computational capabilities. They have signal processing by definition. And, well, you have cameras. The population, the amount of cameras is amazing. Each and every new phone has a camera. And we forget that they have also microphones. They always have microphones. So essentially, you have 2 basic possibilities of capturing the world around you. Not only voice, the microphone is not only for voice, the noise signature might be extremely important. We know that from machine maintenance, you know it from your car. That's the noise you listen to. Oh, I don't like the noise. Okay? So, and of course you get more and more information about position. More and more have GPS and accelerometers. And God knows what is being put on the phones. So you will have a very powerful sensor, mobile, penetrating huge areas, and those sensors are there, and by the way, they have also wireless connectivity, if you forget that. So that in the smartphone space, by the way, we have a very specific trend, and that is dangerous. That is dangerous because so far it was beautiful, it was closed environment, it was manufactured by Nokia or Samsung or God knows who, Motorola, and you didn't have any touch and any possibilities to change whatever, and change meant that you go and buy a new one and you drop the old one and that's it. Now they are opening, there's a general trend to open platform. There's a general trend to Linux-based environment or Linux-similar environment. And that's a huge push. So all these big companies already declared their commitment to go that way, and the market share is increasing. That's a good news, because it means we'll have a possibility to put more and more application and get the sensoric data and process that and work with that. That's incredible risk. You know, if you read now the stories of viruses being disseminated nowadays by going to websites, you know, the whole story of Google and whatever in last week, if you look whatever you have to do to protect your laptop, and again, Wagner in Berkeley had made experiments proving that if you go with a new computer in the network, before you download the virus scanner, you are already infected, average. So, as a matter of fact, imagine having that on your phone. Imagine with the camera and the microphone being under control of an invader. Well, that is something very, very, very scaring. Means that we'll have a lot of issues in security, meaning the platform is not powerful enough to do that on the end system. You have to do that in the infrastructure and do all this pre-checking. That will be a very, very funny story, but that's a little bit different. Okay, but now we have these sensors, the real sensors, the sensors on the phone and whatever. But remember, we wanted to find information. So essentially, for finding the information, we don't have necessarily to look and measure everything. If I'm interested in weather in Barcelona, I don't necessarily have to have access directly to the sensor, my sensor, or your sensor placed in Barcelona. What I do, I go to the web. And what do I get if I Google weather in Barcelona? That's a cut from the real screen, yeah, which I get. And I get first that are first 18 or 20 out of I don't know how many hits, probably around 50. And well, what happens? Really, I could consider just those entries as what Alberto San Giovanni Vincentelli likes to call virtual sensors. And virtual sensors means a source of information, no matter whether it has been pre-processed, extrapolated, it's a fusion of real sensors, it's whatever, it's a source of information. And they have, if you look at this page, at these entries, and say that is a sensor, that is a sensor, that is a sensor, they have exactly the same features as my classical sensor nodes. They are highly redundant, they might disappear, might come back again or never come again. You click, you don't have anything. Each node might be temporary, unavailable, overload, or just switched off and pops up again. And they might deliver false data. I don't know whether the guy really has an updated prediction, or more and more frequently you click on the weather in Barcelona and get advertising for mortgages, you know, in USA. That's reality. But that's the case. I don't know. But I have many of them. So the diversity gives me the possibility to work on that. I'll come back to that in a moment. So what we have a global point of view, which is a classical point of view, would be we have this real sensor networks and connected via radio technology and connected to the internet to deliver information. But I can, and that's my take, reverse the point of view. I say, no, guys, I don't have the classical web-oriented internet where I try to plug in the sensor nodes. My world is essentially a big virtual sensor network. And what is my internet? My internet, my web pages, everything is just virtual sensors which might help me in gaining information, processing the information, and delivering the information. And now I'm a little bit, constrained just to getting and delivering information, not more complex services, just for the sake of clarity. So now we have a lot of questions. So if we would like to get this, if we would like to follow this vision of the future wireless, obviously wireless, internet of sensors, and if I would look at the fixed connectivity again as a kind of fake of a wireless channel, because I don't have very reliable routes, I don't have fixed routes, I have just sources of information which might pop up and disappear, might be connected or disconnected, like my phone is, yeah? Then I have a very different world. So first of all, I have the basic question, how to get the wireless connectivity. And we have hundreds of communication systems using different frequency bands, using whatever. So there's one option to say, well, we will have universal software radio. We have flexibility. But come on, do you really believe in every device, all this complex platform? I mean, that is always the flexibility versus efficiency trade-off. And frankly speaking, I do believe in the flexibility, but I don't believe that will go in every, kind of micro device which I'll use. And even if that would be the case, what is the chance that two devices being completely flexible will meet in a short period when I'm passing along another person and would like to exchange information, that they will scan over all the variants, all the frequencies, all the standards, and meet each other and exchange information? And even if they happen to find the joint channel for just physical layer, what is the chance they will have a joint protocol to talk to each other? So that is a tough issue. So there are two complementary solutions which are really complementary. One is go for dedicated signaling channels. The question is how realistic is to have that in a universal way. That's tough. And the second, which I believe very much, and we have been working on that and are working on that with our Berkeley colleagues, that is called that universal gateways, called that, we'll see the name later, connectivity broker. And essentially we came up with that idea, like 26 published in the home environment, where we advocated that essentially in the home environment you have a big problem. You have all the devices, you have sensors, you have entertainment, you have security, you have cameras, you have whatever. Putting that together is almost unrealistic, and well, that needs the universal gateway. Funny enough, other people are also thinking along the same lines. So what are we envisioning? We are envisioning an infrastructure component which is able to transmit according to different standards. But that's a bigger box, that can be flexible. You can afford that. And can interpret different communication protocols and establish configuration of devices. And in broader vision also change the media encoding, for example, or even change media while preserving the content. That's exactly in line with what I've said previously. In any case, it has to be able to participate in possibly distributed optimization of radio resource management between the different radios, which partially are fixed and partially are flexible, but have to be coordinated somehow. So think in terms of like WLAN access point, which has more and more flexibility and more functionality, which is able to support any radio you imagine, which is able to download any protocol, which is able to do transcoding, which is able to organize which device will go in which frequency and which standard of communication, and decide I'll talk Bluetooth with you with time slots, and I'll talk WLAN in 18 gigahertz future probably in other slots, and call that connectivity broker, and you are with us with our vision. And that, I believe, really will be one of the future issues. Now, having established the basic connectivity, we have the next next question, how to assure the data trustworthiness. You have a lot of data, you have the cameras. Well, cameras are beautiful. How are you going to know whether the build has been post-processed? It's easy. So you could say, well, I'll put watermark, and people, Princeton, Margaret Martinozzi, has been working on, for example, putting a footprint of, say, electromagnetic radiation of the space where you have taken the photo, and you can prove you have really taken that in Paris on, well, Place Pigalle, or you have done that on Washington Square. But boy, that is fine as long as you keep the medium. Now, if you start extracting the information, if you start changing everything, if you start deriving the sentence, Mr. Smith is leaving his house, from the picture, how are you going to put this watermark on this information? Not easy way. So the question is how to generate trustworthiness. Again, in sensors, in classical automation, we did calibration of the sensor, and we said that sensor has been calibrated, sealed, and it's really well performing. Now, what we can do for statistic, we can do for, well, different analysis of behavior. But again, the question is, if we take multiplicity of sensors, if you take these virtual sensors, how do you know there are several independent sensors, and that's not one source of information faking to be 200, to say, well, the majority voted, that is correct information. So that's a big issue, and that's a lot of research needed for that. Now, we have another feature which comes from the wireless sensor networks. It's data-centric addressing. So essentially, because we have been always focused on information, and that comes from a white paper and paper which we have written jointly with the Berkeley crowd, that is interest in temperature in the kitchen, not referring to node with some mysterious IP address. So I would like to have addresses which are by no means unique, but are pertaining to the information. And I would like to have attribute specification like value selector. I would like to know when temperature is increasing above 25 degrees and humidity, say, equal to 70. And I have scoping. I have organization. I have region, like kitchen, like courtyard, like 30 meters around the tree. And I can obviously define my request in that way, providing I know what the concepts mean, which is by no means easy to express and by no means easy to be universally understood in the same way. And my best, favorite example is to take temperature. You say temperature. If that would be not a whiteboard but a window, there are rooms with windows occasionally. In Europe more frequently than in US. So if you have a window and you measure the temperature on the inside of the window is pretty much very different from the temperature of the outside of the window. And the distance is just 2 millimeters of glass between them. There's no location system which will give you this accuracy. So how are you going to express the semantic notion of indoor measurements on window and outdoor measurements on window? A lot of funny stories. So how can we achieve that? The most trivial solution is flooding, better the directed diffusion Deborah stream. And well, very interesting work has been done in TinyDB projects. Oh, TinyDB, there's a letter missing there. Okay, and additionally we need a lot of scoping. We need quantifiers. Do I like to get all the information, at least some of them, any? Do I like to have them once or periodic, with which period? And then I would like to have probably a mean value, and probably I would like to have an accuracy, and timeliness, and security, and God knows what. So that's much more which I would like to express in my request for information. So the very nice old computer science framework for decoupling the source of information from the consumer of information is the publish, subscribe, pops up system paradigm. Very well known, very classical. we have been working on that, and obviously I'm referring a lot to my own research, because otherwise why should I talk about that? That doesn't mean that's the whole world, but that's my world where I'm living in. So what we took one variant of that suggested by Karzaniga and called essentially semantic-based publish-subscribe. And we have extended that. My PhD students notably have been working on that. And that's pretty much a new work where the classical publish-subscribe paradigm, like subscribe, unsubscribe, notify on the side of subscriber, and that notify you get it, and on the kind of publishers you publish your events, has been extended by a couple of interesting features. What is a couple of interesting features? Here you see, if you look at these paradigms, you announce whatever you believe might be interesting for anybody. You don't know whether anybody is interested. Those who subscribe define what are their interests, what they would like to obtain, like temperature in the kitchen. And then somebody has to do the matching. You need some intermediate party, or several of them, who will take the notifications, which take the subscription and say, oh, somebody knows what is the temperature in the kitchen, somebody is interested, let's inform the interested guy. Now, the problem is that everybody who believes somebody might be interested publishes. That's what we have in the web. Everybody publishes you whatever, picture of his girlfriend, of his neighbor, of his cat. Why should I be interested in his cat? God knows. He publishes. Now, if you give some additional parameters, which I'll not explain in detail, there's also some a little bit more in the next slide, what you can do, you can inform the publisher about the scope of subscriptions. So I can constrain from publishing of issues nobody's interested in. On the other hand, you could imagine a different story. You could inform people what is being published to get them interested. It's also an option. But in general, we do a couple of decouplings. First of all, usually the publish subscribe has been kind of sold in one black box with supporting protocols. We would like to decouple that, and we have suggested a framework to decouple that. We have a possibility to give additional data attributes to say, well, that is a new concept, like the region, like I define my property, what is Adam's property. Yeah? And we have also possibility to define and plug in what we call service extensions, which is nothing else as rules for processing, like say, don't send me temperature, send me changes of temperature bigger than 5 degrees Fahrenheit. So I can essentially reduce the traffic in the network. So that is something which I believe is very important. Now, if you go further with this publish subscribe, one example again, which a student of mine is investigating, is the so-called area-based push services. What are area-based push services? Well, essentially that is a publish subscribe very frequently by third party. Very interesting. I'm not asking for the information. Somebody subscribed me to get me informed about these issues, which is much beyond the wireless sensor networks. So that is on trigger dissemination of relevant information within some given region. That might be warning, for example, chemical pollution. You have a problem with a chemical factory, so you would like to inform everybody in, say, 200 meters around this plant, 300 meters, stop the traffic. How are you going to do that? That's advertising. We have a bargain on whatever, or that might be information on the rules of behavior, that is a higher danger of fire, behave, don't do that. There is an animal, don't disturb this animal in this proximity. Now, that's just a picture what we would like to do. We would like to inform people within the area. We would like to inform people entering the area as quickly as possible. So we can obviously use a classical cellular infrastructure, but look here. the funny story is, if that is your area, that will be covered by base station belonging in that case to different group controllers, but probably to single carrier, but they might be overlapped by another carrier and completely different technologies. And usually if you go out here, obviously, if I would ask people in this room, you are subscribed to completely different carriers and services and whatever. So I have to go through all of them to reach people down there. That is a very complex issue. Namely, we have to support different multiple target regions, might be hundreds of those. If each shopkeeper defines his region of informing customers, that's a problem. The individuals are to be addressed, have to be continuously monitored essentially in advance, because how are you going to know the person is exactly within the region if you don't follow him? And alternatively, a matching of coverage of individual base stations also is needed. We have to know what is the scope of coverage. That's by no means a simple story. So just to give you a feeling, approximating the coverage of a base station experimentally means that you have a request to terminals, and the terminal is giving its location and say quality of signal, and then the other guy is doing that, and then the other guy is doing that, and you end up with hundreds of those. And essentially what you should do is a kind of shape which would give you the coverage. Well, you can try to extrapolate it in some more neatly shapes, but that you lose the accuracy, and possibly you believe you have alerted somebody who doesn't have the connectivity. So that's a lot of interesting issues. You might mix that with another ad hoc mechanisms, and you might say, especially if the density with this area is small. So first of all, you could ask everybody to distribute it to any newbie, or you might say, even if the density is small, you have to go outside the area and warn already in advance, well, if you will be going to this area, be careful. Probably he doesn't go there, he diverts. So a lot of interesting stories here. I'll skip that. But now we have in general varying connectivity, and well, we have the whole theory now of delay tolerant networks, the whole story about, for example, information being given to the police patrol car to be taken somewhere, or you push the information when you meet somebody, whatever. In wireless sensor networks, essentially, we always have been based on thinking in terms of multiple routes. And if we have time, I can show you the previous, that's not animation, that's video of real stuff taking on the object. And the routes change, and we essentially know that we have to do that. Now, we have the possibility to use numerous routes also to improve many aspects of quality of service. We can improve on delay, on success probability, delivery success, but also on fairness. Essentially, by using multiple routes, take flooding, we can minimize the time to hit, and we can equal much better, get much better fairness. So that is the issue. Now, coming from really the wireless into wired, and that's one of the issues in forward, which we'll be looking at. By the way, you might not know that WINLAB is associated partner of our new European community big project on future internet. So we'll have interactions. That's a good news. I'm very looking forward to that. So the question is, can we do that? Can we exploit that also in wired? Can we learn from wireless and put it into wires? And obviously we are missing the technology of engineering. That's exactly about sensor networks. How are we doing the planning? How do we do deployment? How many sensors do I need to capture the information with a reliability proper to that? And all these questions scale immediately in the world of information beyond the sensor networks. So having said that, I promised you to give you a couple of minutes of survey about our sensor network test bed. I'm still in time, that's good. So what have we done? Similarly to what WINLAB does, we believe that experiment is very important. And once we started several years ago, at the pretty much beginning of the sensor networks hype, working on that, we said, well, we need some real stuff. Well, measurements as evaluation technology, that's taking for Red Jane, very classical book, The Art of Performance Evaluation, the only book on performance evaluation, not queuing theory on simulation or what. So I said, well, that's a very tricky story. There is high cost, look at your orbit test bed. That is expected accuracy, which is very variable because you never know which are the factors which might influence you. The required time of experiment is unpredictable. You might have any type of errors or mistakes or whatever. Then it's very difficult to check what really influences the result. And the good news is that it's very good salability. You go out and you say, I've measured that, and almost nobody dares to contradict. Because people kind of mysteriously believe, oh, he has measured, that must be the reality. That's fun, but that's the story. And test beds for meshed multi-hop systems. You have also a meshed multi-hop system in general. Sensor network, definitely. That is much more than collection of hardware and software. A highly distributed system is really a tricky one. So how are we going to assure some global knowledge to check the correctness of local behavior? How are we going to support in a controlled way setting up, changing the topology, the configuration of the network, update the code, generate the traffic, use the testbed for experiment, and yes, collect the result in a non-intrusive, not disturbing way. So what we did, we set up the following philosophy, and that are the components. Those are the classical sensor nodes, the most popular T-mode from Telos. And here we have another that's a result of European Community Project. Very similar in architecture, besides those have the Zigbee radio, 802.15.4 radio in 2.4 gigahertz, and those have the car opening radio from Infineon running in 800 megahertz. We can play and compare. Then we put USB hubs and we connected those babies having incidentally USB plugs on there, two USB hubs, and you will see the functionality of that. That's both for data and power transport, by the way. And then we have supernodes as group controllers being in the position to do some hierarchical control, but also to pre-processing of data. So we have processing here, we have processing here. And obviously we need a server, and obviously for, So now looking more into details, that is how the nodes are put on ceiling of offices. You'll see the building later. And ceilings because it's more difficult to steal them. And that's a good argument, you see, they are the two babies. And what we do really have the power support, and that is very important because how are you going to change batteries in hundreds of sensor nodes? And by the way, how are you going to change the topology? And we can change the topology just by cutting the power, and this is that. And then we get the power and we start again, and it's there. So we can really control it in a very nice way. By the way, we have now a circuit which is not presented in the figure, which is measuring very carefully the power consumption. So we have a real hardware measurement of the power, so we can compare protocols. And we have the notion of socket, which is a place of montage, place of fixing, so that we can add and interchange the nodes and look at different characteristics of individual nodes. They are not identical. if you interchange the physical pieces you have. And obviously we have the whole security infrastructure with double firewalls and whatever, so that we can allow for external access without interfering with our data, so everything is done very neatly. Now where is that? That is our building in Berlin, in the middle of downtown. We have covered, that's the campus, we have covered 3 levels, 3 floors of this part of this building. And essentially it looks like the following way. We have it always pairways, both types of the nodes. And we have them in such setup here within the floors in standard module, which is 16 square meters. There are 2 of those groups of those nodes. And if you look at that, we have all in all like 200 nodes deployed. So it's quite a nice network, and we cover, well, that's here like, I think, 1,500 square meters. So quite a nice surface. Okay, so if we would say that is now the subscribing party, which is going to collect information, the sink of information, that might be a typical connectivity matrix. And now let's take a single route. Well, of course, it depends on the routing protocol. That was like metric of smallest amount of hops. And you see that the route is pretty strange. We have very strange propagation conditions. We have a lot of steel in the walls. So horizontal signal penetration is much worse than vertical. Beat, somebody opens the doors and suddenly everything changes. So everything is really dynamic. And we have the possibility just by the GUI to take a part of the nodes and by click kill them, so that you see all of them are gone pretty quickly. And we see how the network has to reconfigure. And we have been playing during our open days, a game, try to kill the connectivity. How many nodes do you have to switch off until you get the connectivity killed? Okay, we have obviously experiment management support with web interface for job registration management control. We have health monitoring system based on SNMP. And yes, we opened in open source most of the code, so there is a potential of replication that. And now in the new European Commission project, we will be further developing that and opening that for the network for testbed federation. Namely, I've mentioned the propagation conditions. If I can prove that protocol A is better than protocol B in my site, is that true in Harvard? Is that true in Southern California? Is that true in Zurich? So we would like to work on interfaces to move experiments, to define experiment in a portable way. And by the way, Matt Walsh in Harvard is a partner. Ramesh Govindan is partner. Zurich, well, associated like you in them. Zurich is full partner at the age Zurich. So the 4 and us, we are responsible for the SensorNet part of the testbed. Another colleague is in Spain will be extending that by robots and moving objects in addition. We'll also use that. So we have all the best testbeds in sensor networks area worldwide known to us, and we'll work on that. Okay, dear guys, I have a couple of slides more about the economical and legal aspect, but I think I'll skip that because the time is expiring. So I'll stick to my time. And well, what I would like to say for the end, I've mentioned a couple of ideas. I have not mentioned a lot of more. So obviously the issue of economy, the issue of legal rules, the issue of information search in multimedia archives, there is machine learning to extract the context, the real meaningful context. What am I doing now? Should I be disturbed now or not? So a lot of funny stories. There are sociological aspects. By the way, one of the projects we are intending to do is to have a look how people behave if they are in such a monitored environment. How do you behave if your rooms are full of sensors? How do you like it? How do you adapt your behavior? Probably you start changing your behavior patterns. Obviously, the other story is security. People are generally very reluctant to pay for security. So one of our colleagues is going to do some research and doing some research in this space. We have summarized a lot of these activities under a new research center for human-centric communication, which I have the pleasure to be a speaker of. And we deployed that, and that's on a kind of ramping up. So take care, stay tuned, and if you are interested, obviously ask me questions, and be assured we have a lot to do. Thank you.